I never imagined that one quiet December phone call would change everything I believed about family. When my own son casually told me he was spending Christmas with his wife's family and had forgotten to include me, I smiled and said I understood. But after I hung up, I sat alone at my kitchen table and realized something terrifying. I had become invisible in the life I helped build. Then I discovered emails about selling my home after I was gone and secret changes to my bank account. That was the moment I knew this was no longer about being forgotten. It was about being erased. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I am 71 years old. I have lived most of my life in the quiet hills of Asheville, North Carolina, in a small wooden house that sits just high enough to see the morning fog drift through the valley. For nearly 4 decades, this place was filled with voices, footsteps, and laughter. Now, most days, it is filled with silence. I am a widow, a retired high school literature teacher, and, for the first time in my life, a woman learning what it truly means to live alone. I spent 35 years standing in front of classrooms, teaching young people how to read between the lines of novels, how to find meaning in poetry, and how to express their own thoughts with confidence. Teaching was never just a job to me, it was a calling. I stayed late to help struggling students, wrote recommendation letters on weekends, and used my own money to buy books for children who could not afford them. Many people told me I should have pursued administrative positions or written textbooks, but I always chose to remain in the classroom. My family came first. My son came first. My husband, Thomas, understood that about me. We met in college, built our lives slowly, and raised our son together with patience and discipline. He was my anchor, my partner in every sense of the word. When he suffered a massive stroke 8 years ago, I became his full-time caregiver overnight. I learned how to administer medication, how to read medical charts, and how to stay awake through endless nights. When he passed away, holding my hand in a quiet hospital room, a part of me went with him. I buried my grief because my son still needed me to be strong. The house we shared remains my most precious possession. Every room holds a memory. The kitchen still smells faintly of cinnamon and coffee in the mornings. The living room walls are lined with framed photographs, birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, and summer vacations. In the hallway, there is a picture of Michael at age 7, missing his front teeth, smiling proudly with a handmade science project. These images remind me of who I was and who I gave my life to. Michael was a bright, ambitious child. He excelled in school, earned scholarships, and eventually built a successful career in Atlanta. I was proud of him in ways I cannot fully express. When he married Rachel, I welcomed her into our family with open arms. At first, she seemed polite and respectful, but over time, I sensed a distance that I could never quite bridge. She was courteous, but never warm, present, but never close. For more than 25 years, Christmas was my sacred tradition. I decorated every corner of the house, baked for days, and wrapped gifts late into the night. Those holidays were the heartbeat of our family. But gradually, visits became shorter. Excuses became more frequent. Phone calls grew rare. I told myself it was normal. Children grow up. Lives get busy. I learned to accept less without complaining. Still, inside me, a quiet struggle began to grow. I did not want to burden my son. I did not want to seem needy or outdated. So I stayed silent. I smiled on video calls. I said I was fine. I convinced myself that love did not need constant presence. On one cold evening in early December, I sat alone by my living room window, watching the lights appear on distant houses. Christmas was approaching, and I felt a strange heaviness in my chest. Something was changing. I could sense it, even if I did not yet understand what it meant. If you're still watching and starting to feel the quiet loneliness behind this story, please comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Have you ever felt slowly pushed aside by the people you love most? Because what happened next made that feeling impossible to ignore. Now, let's move on to Chapter 2. Winter settled over Asheville earlier than usual that year. The mornings arrived wrapped in pale gray fog, and the evenings sank into silence long before I felt ready to be alone with my thoughts. In the first week of December, I found myself checking my phone far more often than I cared to admit. Each time the screen remained dark, a small wave of disappointment passed through me. Michael had not called in days. I told myself he was busy, that successful people always were, yet a quiet unease began to take root inside me. One afternoon, after staring at my phone for nearly an hour, I finally gathered the courage to dial his number. It rang several times before he answered, his voice distracted, as if I had interrupted something more important. He spoke quickly about work deadlines and holiday plans. In the middle of the conversation, he casually mentioned that he, Rachel, and the children would be spending Christmas skiing in Colorado with her relatives. He spoke as though he were discussing the weather. There was no pause, no hesitation, no invitation. The words passed between us like cold air. I listened carefully, waiting for him to add something else. Perhaps he would say they would visit me before they left. Perhaps he would ask if I wanted to join them. Perhaps he would notice my silence. None of that happened. When the call ended, I remained seated at my kitchen table, my hands resting on the surface, my mind replaying every sentence he had spoken. For the first time, I understood that I had not been excluded with cruelty. I had been excluded with indifference. Later that evening, a message arrived from Rachel. It was polite and brief, wishing me good health and hoping I would take care. There were no questions about my plans, no suggestion of seeing each other, no warmth beneath the words. I stared at the screen and realized that her message was not meant to connect. It was meant to conclude. For days afterward, I tried to make sense of what had happened. I reviewed every recent interaction in my mind. Had I said something wrong? Had I become too quiet, too boring, too old? I compared this year to the past, to the Christmas mornings when Michael used to rush downstairs in his pajamas, his eyes shining with excitement. Back then, he never forgot where he belonged. I told myself countless stories to soften the pain. They were busy. Travel was expensive. Children needed stability. I was being sensitive. I had always been emotional. These explanations became shields, protecting me from admitting what felt unbearable. Accepting that I had been forgotten seemed more frightening than any excuse I could invent. My days grew quieter. I ate most meals alone, standing at the kitchen counter. I decorated the tree without music, without laughter, without interruption. At the grocery store, I watched families argue gently over gift wrapping paper and felt like an observer in someone else's life. Even simple errands reminded me of what I no longer had. At night, memories returned uninvited. I saw Michael at 6 years old, helping me hang ornaments. I heard his laughter when he found presents under the tree. Those images felt like messages from another lifetime. The contrast between then and now was almost unbearable. My body responded before my mind did. Sleep became shallow. Food lost its flavor. A constant tightness settled in my chest. Some evenings, I sat in the dark living room long after sunset, unsure why I had not turned on the lights. One night, as I washed dishes, tears began to fall into the sink. I did not sob. I did not cry loudly. I simply stood there, breathing slowly, letting the water run, wiping my face before anyone could see. Even alone, I felt embarrassed by my weakness. A few days later, I took down a small ornament I had hung near the window. I placed it back in its box and closed the lid carefully. As I looked at the calendar, counting the days until Christmas, I felt the first quiet crack form inside my heart. Something had shifted, and I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. If you're still watching, and you can feel how painful it is to be forgotten without being told directly, please comment number 2 below to show your support. But trust me, what I discovered next changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. Now, let's move on to chapter 3. The morning it happened began like so many others. I woke before sunrise, wrapped myself in a thick cardigan, and brewed a small pot of coffee. Outside, frost clung to the bare branches, and the mountains rested beneath a pale winter sky. The house was silent, except for the gentle ticking of the kitchen clock. After the quiet ache of the past few days, I did not expect anything unusual. I simply opened my laptop, intending to read the local news and check my messages. Among routine newsletters and advertisements, one unfamiliar subject line caught my attention. It contained my name and the words, "Property Evaluation." Curious, I opened it without hesitation. Within seconds, my breath caught in my throat. The email was clearly not meant for me. It was addressed to Michael and Rachel from a real estate agent. Attached were documents outlining market estimates for my home, potential renovation watts, and projected profits. Near the bottom, one sentence stood out in cold, professional language. "We can proceed with the listing after her passing." I read that line again and again, hoping I had misunderstood it. My hands began to tremble as I scrolled through the rest of the message. There was no mention of consulting me, no question about my wishes, no acknowledgement that I was still alive, still capable, still present. To them, I had already been reduced to a future event. For several minutes, I simply stared at the screen. A strange numbness spread through my body, as if my mind were trying to protect itself from the meaning of what I had seen. When the feeling finally broke, it was replaced by a sharp, cutting realization. My son and his wife had been planning my life without me. They had been preparing for my absence as though it were inevitable and convenient. I began to read the email more carefully, studying every phrase. They discussed timing, tax implications, and market trends with calm efficiency. It was all so practical, so detached. I felt less like a mother and more like a piece of property waiting to be transferred. Still shaking, I decided to distract myself by checking my bank account. I logged in as I had done countless times before, but this time the password did not work. Confused, I clicked the recovery option. Several notifications appeared, showing recent security changes and unfamiliar login locations. Rachel's email address was listed as an authorized contact. My chest tightened as understanding settled in. She had access. She had been managing my finances without my full awareness. Fear rose quickly, followed by disbelief. I had trusted them completely. I had assumed that helping meant protecting. Now, I saw how thin that line could be. I sank into the chair beside the window, my coffee growing cold in my hands. My heart raced, and my thoughts scattered in every direction. Part of me wanted to call Michael immediately and demand answers. Another part wanted to pretend none of this was real. I had spent years avoiding confrontation, choosing peace over honesty, silence over discomfort. That instinct urged me to stay quiet once more. Memories flooded my mind. I remember nights spent sewing costumes for school plays, mornings driving him to early practices, afternoons helping with homework. I wondered when exactly I had become someone whose future could be negotiated behind closed doors. Had I given too much? Had I taught him that my needs were optional? As the day passed, a heavy sense of vulnerability settled over me. I imagined being pressured to sell my home, being told it was for my own good, being moved somewhere unfamiliar and small. The thought terrified me more than I wanted to admit. That evening, I created a folder on my computer. I saved the email. I took screenshots of the account changes. I wrote down dates and details. For the first time in years, I did not look away from what frightened me. I looked straight at it. When I finally turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I paused in the hallway and studied the family photographs on the wall. I still loved my son. That had not changed, but something inside me had shifted. I was no longer only hurt. I was awake. If you're still watching and you're shocked by what was hidden behind those emails and bank accounts, please comment number 3 below to let me know you're still here. Because what I tried to do next nearly broke me even more than the betrayal itself. Now, let's move on to chapter 4. After discovering the email and the changes in my bank account, I began living with a constant sense of unease. Every morning, I woke up feeling as though I were carrying an invisible weight on my chest. I moved through my days carefully, watching every notification on my phone, rereading every message, searching for signs of reassurance that never came. I did not tell anyone what I had learned. I kept it locked inside me, afraid that speaking the truth would somehow make it more real. I tried, at first, to pretend that nothing had changed. I called Michael more often, always choosing moments when I thought he might be free. I asked about his work, the children, their plans. I avoided mentioning the email. I avoided asking difficult questions. My voice remained gentle, hopeful, almost apologetic. His responses were polite but brief. He always seemed distracted, always in a hurry to end the conversation. When we hung up, I was left staring at the silent phone, wondering how two people who loved each other could feel so far apart. In an effort to reconnect, I began reaching into our shared past. I sent him old photographs of birthdays and vacations. I reminded him of the stories we used to laugh about. I wrote him a handwritten letter, telling him how much I missed our long talks at the kitchen table. I mailed small gifts for the children, carefully wrapped and labeled. I even invited them to come spend a quiet weekend with me before Christmas. Each attempt felt like throwing a message into the ocean and waiting for a reply that never arrived. Eventually, I gathered the courage to message Rachel about the bank account. I chose my words carefully, asking whether there had been some mistake. Her response was vague and defensive. She explained that she had only been trying to help me stay organized. She said it was for my benefit. There was no apology, no acknowledgement that she had crossed a boundary. I felt dismissed, as though my concerns were inconvenient. Once again, I chose not to argue. Once again, I stepped back. Instead of directing my anger outward, I turned it inward. I blamed myself for being weak, for not speaking up sooner, for trusting too easily. I wondered whether I had raised Michael to take me for granted. I compared myself to other women my age, who seemed more confident, more assertive. Why could they protect themselves while I struggled to do the same? The questions circled endlessly in my mind, leaving me exhausted. On the surface, my life continued as usual. I went grocery shopping, attended church, and participated in my small book club. I smiled at neighbors and made polite conversation. No one suspected the turmoil beneath my calm appearance. I had become skilled at hiding pain, at presenting stability even when I felt fragile inside. The stress began to affect my body. Sleep came in broken fragments. My head ached often. My blood pressure rose. Some days, even simple tasks left me breathless. I worried quietly about my health, knowing that vulnerability would only make me more dependent on the very people I no longer fully trusted. There were moments when I considered giving up entirely. It would be easier, I told myself, to remain silent and accept whatever happened. At least then, I would not risk losing my son. At least then, I would not be alone. But each time I reached that conclusion, something inside me resisted. Gradually, I began taking small steps to protect myself. I changed my banking passwords. I removed unauthorized access. I organized my legal documents. I learned more about my rights. I did not announce these changes. I simply made them, quietly reclaiming pieces of my independence. One evening, as I reread unanswered messages on my phone, a painful realization settled in. I was the only one trying to hold this relationship together, and for the first time, I allowed myself to admit that love should not feel this lonely. If you're still watching and you can feel how exhausting it is to keep fighting alone for a relationship, please comment number 4 below so I know you understand. But just when I thought I was completely invisible, something unexpected happened. Now, let's move on to chapter 5. By the time December reached its middle weeks, I felt completely drained. The quiet struggle of the past months had worn me down in ways I could not easily explain. I no longer checked my phone with anticipation. I no longer waited for messages that rarely came. Each morning, I moved through my routine with mechanical precision, as if emotion itself had become too heavy to carry. The realization that I had been trying alone for so long left me feeling invisible. One afternoon, while returning books to the public library, I noticed a small flyer near the entrance. It announced a memoir writing group for seniors, hosted every Thursday evening in a quiet reading room. At first, I walked past it without a second thought. I had never considered myself a writer. My life felt too ordinary, too private, too tangled to place on paper. Yet that night, the image of the flyer lingered in my mind. After several days of hesitation, I decided to attend. The first meeting surprised me. A circle of older men and women sat around a long wooden table, each carrying stories shaped by decades of living. Some spoke about careers they had lost. Others shared memories of war, immigration, or illness. When my turn came, I introduced myself softly and admitted that I was there because I felt forgotten. No one interrupted. No one dismissed my words. For the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely heard. Encouraged by that atmosphere, I began to write. Each evening, after washing the dishes and turning off the television, I sat at my desk and opened a blank document. I wrote about my years in the classroom, about Thomas's illness, about raising Michael, and about the growing silence in my life. I wrote about Christmas mornings that no longer came. Some nights, tears blurred the screen. Other nights, I felt strangely calm, as if releasing thoughts I had imprisoned for years. After several weeks, I gathered enough courage to share one of my essays with the group. My hands trembled as I read aloud. I expected sympathy or polite encouragement. Instead, I saw genuine emotion on their faces. One younger volunteer who assisted with the program approached me afterward and asked if she could post my piece on a community storytelling website. I hesitated, fearing exposure, but eventually agreed. What followed felt unreal. Within days, my story was shared thousands of times. Messages flooded my inbox. People from across the country thanked me for giving voice to feelings they had never been able to express. News outlets requested interviews. Bloggers quoted my words. Strangers recognized my name. I had become visible overnight. Soon after, I received an email from a publishing house in New York. They praised my writing and offered to discuss a potential book contract. The numbers they mentioned seemed impossible. I read the message repeatedly, convinced it must be a mistake. After consulting a lawyer, I realized it was genuine. My private reflections had opened doors I never imagined. Amid the excitement, fear crept in. I worried about Michael's reaction. I worried about family conflict. I questioned whether I had revealed too much. Part of me longed to retreat into silence again, but each time doubt appeared, another message arrived from someone who felt less alone because of my words. Letters came from widows, retired teachers, and elderly parents who felt invisible. They shared their own stories, their own disappointments, their own hopes. Through them, I discovered a community I never knew existed, a network of resilience, honesty, and quiet strength. Slowly, my identity began to shift. I was no longer only a neglected mother. I was a storyteller, a survivor, a woman whose voice mattered. One evening, as rain tapped gently against my window, I sat before my laptop, staring at the growing manuscript. I felt afraid. I felt hopeful. Most of all, I felt alive, standing at the edge of a life I was finally ready to claim. After my story spread online, my quiet life disappeared almost overnight. My phone vibrated constantly with messages from reporters, producers, and readers who wanted to hear more. Email notifications arrived faster than I could answer them. Some mornings, I woke up already exhausted, knowing that another day of attention awaited me. Part of me felt grateful. Another part longed for the simplicity of anonymity I had once taken for granted. Among the many invitations, one stood out. A respected national television program dedicated to social issues and personal resilience asked if I would be willing to appear as a guest. They wanted me to speak about aging, invisibility, and finding one's voice later in life. The producer emphasized that millions of viewers would be watching. When I read the message, my hands grew cold. This was no longer a small online story. This was a public stage. For days, I could not decide how to respond. I imagined Michael seeing my face on television. I imagined Rachel listening to every word. I worried that my honesty would be interpreted as betrayal. I feared being labeled bitter, dramatic, or ungrateful. Above all, I feared losing my son completely. Silence had always been my shield. It had protected fragile relationships, even at the cost of my own well-being. Each night, I revisited the memories that had brought me here. I remembered the email discussing my home as if I were already gone. I remembered discovering that my finances had been altered without my consent. I remembered sitting alone at Christmas, convincing myself that loneliness was normal. Those moments reminded me that my pain had not been imagined. It had been real. It had been repeated, and it had been ignored. I decided to seek quiet advice before making my choice. My publishing representative arranged a meeting with a media lawyer who explained the risks and responsibilities of speaking publicly. He encouraged honesty without cruelty, clarity without accusation. He reminded me that my story belonged to me. Hearing those words felt strangely empowering. For the first time, I understood that telling the truth did not mean attacking anyone. It meant honoring my own experience. Once I agreed to participate, preparation became my refuge. I wrote down the key moments I wanted to share. I practiced answering difficult questions aloud in my living room. I set firm boundaries for myself, promising not to mention names or personal details. I chose a simple outfit and focused on breathing steadily. Each small step strengthened my resolve. The night before the interview, sleep refused to come. I sat in the dim light of the living room, surrounded by photographs of a life that had shaped me. I looked at Thomas's smiling face, at Michael's childhood portraits, at images of holidays long past. Tears slipped down my cheeks as I whispered quiet hopes for understanding and peace. I wrote a short entry in my journal, reminding myself why I had begun this journey. The following morning, I stood before the bathroom mirror longer than usual. I studied the lines on my face, the silver in my hair, the strength in my eyes. I no longer saw a forgotten woman. I saw someone who had survived loss, disappointment, and fear. I saw someone who deserved to be heard. At the television studio, everything moved quickly. Technicians adjusted microphones. Staff members hurried across bright hallways. I sat in a small waiting room, breathing slowly, listening to my heartbeat. When they finally led me onto the set, the lights seemed impossibly bright. As I took my seat, the host smiled gently. The cameras focused. The room fell silent. I folded my hands, closed my eyes for a moment, and reminded myself why I was there. I had chosen truth over comfort, and there was no turning back. If you're still watching, and your heart is racing after that difficult decision to speak out publicly, please comment number 6 below to show you're still with me, because the consequences that followed were far more intense than I ever imagined. Now, let's move on to Chapter 7. The morning after the interview aired, I woke before my alarm, my heart already racing. For a moment, I lay still in bed, listening to the familiar creaks of the house and trying to gather my thoughts. Then I reached for my phone. The screen lit up instantly, flooded with notifications, messages, emails, missed calls, and social media alerts filled every corner. I had known the response would be strong, but I had not imagined anything like this. Support arrived first. Hundreds of strangers wrote to thank me for my honesty. Many shared their own stories of being overlooked by family members, of feeling invisible in their later years. Some called me brave. Others said I had given them courage. Journalists requested follow-up interviews. Online articles summarized my appearance. My face appeared in places I had never expected to see it. With every new message, I felt both humbled and overwhelmed. At the same time, the exposure placed my family under an unforgiving spotlight. Within hours, Michael's colleagues began asking questions. Friends sent him links and screenshots. Rachel's social media accounts filled with critical comments. People speculated, judged, and analyzed every detail of their lives. Strangers who had never met them formed opinions based on fragments of my story. Our private pain had become public discussion. A few days later, I learned that Rachel's employer had requested an emergency meeting. Her company relied heavily on public image and client trust. My interview had created concerns they could not ignore. After several tense conversations, they decided to terminate her contract. When Michael finally mentioned it in a voicemail, his voice sounded hollow and exhausted. The loss of her job placed sudden financial pressure on their household, intensifying existing stress. Hearing this filled me with conflicting emotions. I had never intended to cause harm. I had not spoken to punish anyone. Yet part of me felt relieved. For years, my feelings had been dismissed as minor and inconvenient. Now the consequences were visible. My truth had weight. It mattered. Michael called repeatedly. His messages shifted from confusion to anger, then to desperation. He accused me of embarrassing the family. He questioned my motives. He demanded explanations. Yet beneath his harsh words, I sensed fear. His carefully constructed life was unraveling, and he did not know how to stop it. I chose not to respond immediately. Instead, I turned off my phone and spent an afternoon walking through a nearby park. The winter air was crisp and clean. Leaves crunched beneath my shoes. With every step, I reminded myself that I was allowed to protect my peace. Reacting impulsively would only deepen the wounds. Silence, this time, was not avoidance. It was self-preservation. Media requests continued to arrive. Some offered sympathetic coverage. Others sought drama. I learned quickly to decline interviews that felt invasive. I limited my public appearances. I focused on maintaining control over my narrative. Fame, I realized, was not power unless handled carefully. In the quiet hours of the evening, I reflected on everything that had happened. I acknowledged my guilt and my sadness. I also acknowledged my growth. Speaking out had been painful, but it had freed me from years of emotional confinement. Change, I understood, was rarely gentle. One afternoon, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the sun sink behind the mountains, my phone remained silent for the first time in days. The storm had not passed entirely, but it had slowed. I felt calm. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it with clarity and courage. In the weeks following the media storm, I chose silence, not the kind that comes from fear, but the kind that comes from reflection. I limited my phone calls, declined most invitations, and focused on restoring a sense of balance in my daily life. Each morning I walked through my neighborhood, breathing in the cold air and reminding myself that healing required patience. I was no longer willing to rush toward reconciliation simply to avoid discomfort. Michael did not contact me for nearly 3 weeks. When he finally appeared at my front door one gray afternoon, I was surprised by how different he looked. His shoulders were slumped, dark circles framed his eyes, and the confidence he once carried so easily seemed to have vanished. He stood there hesitantly, as though unsure whether he deserved to be welcomed inside. I invited him into the living room and poured us both a cup of tea. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, filled with memories and regret. Finally, he looked at me and apologized, not with excuses or defensiveness, but with honesty. He admitted that he had failed to protect our relationship. He confessed that he had allowed Rachel's influence and his own fear of conflict to shape his decisions. He acknowledged that he had treated my feelings as secondary to his convenience. I listened carefully, resisting the urge to interrupt or soften his words. When he finished, I spoke calmly about my pain. I described the loneliness, the betrayal, and the gradual erosion of trust. I told him that love did not excuse neglect. I explained that being his mother did not mean accepting disrespect. For the first time, I did not minimize my emotions to make him comfortable. We then discussed practical matters. I made it clear that my finances were mine alone. I had changed all access permissions and would not allow anyone to manage them without my consent. Michael accepted this without argument. He agreed that boundaries were necessary, even if they felt unfamiliar. As we continued talking, we recognized patterns that had shaped our relationship for years. I had avoided confrontation. He had avoided responsibility. We both admitted that our silence had enabled misunderstanding. Instead of blaming each other, we focused on learning new ways to communicate honestly and directly. Forgiveness did not arrive instantly. I told Michael that rebuilding trust would take time. I was willing to try, but only if our relationship was based on transparency and mutual respect. He accepted these conditions, promising consistency rather than grand gestures. Rachel did not accompany him that day. She did not call or send a message. Her absence spoke quietly of unresolved tension. I chose not to demand explanations. This was not the moment for forced reconciliation. My priority was establishing a healthier foundation with my son. Over the following months, we began again in small, deliberate steps. Michael called once a week. We met for lunch occasionally. Our conversations were no longer rushed or superficial. We spoke about our lives, our concerns, and our hopes. He listened more. I spoke more freely. Neither of us tried to control the other. One evening, after he left, I sat alone in my living room and reflected on our progress. Our family was not perfect. It might never be, but it was becoming honest. And for the first time in years, I felt at peace knowing that I had chosen self-respect over silence. If you're still watching and you've been hoping for healing and closure in this story, Please comment number 8 below to let me know you've stayed with me until now, because what happened next showed me the true meaning of peace, strength, and self-worth. Now, let's move on to the final chapter. 1 year after everything changed, I often find myself standing on the small balcony of my home in Charleston, South Carolina, watching the waves roll in from the Atlantic. The air here carries the scent of salt and sunlight, so different from the cool mountain mornings of Asheville. This place represents more than a change of address. It represents a decision I made to begin again on my own terms. My book was released 6 months ago, and its success still feels unreal. Letters arrive every week from readers who found comfort in my words. Some tell me that my story encouraged them to set boundaries. Others say it helped them feel less alone. I attend occasional book signings and speak at small conferences, sharing my experiences with honesty and humility. For the first time, my voice reaches beyond the walls of my home. With part of the proceeds, I established a small foundation dedicated to supporting isolated seniors. We organize discussion groups, counseling sessions, and creative workshops. Visiting these programs reminds me why I chose to speak out. Every smile, every quiet thank you, confirms that pain can be transformed into purpose. My relationship with Michael has also evolved. We see each other regularly, but without pressure or obligation. Our conversations are thoughtful and respectful. He no longer tries to manage my life, and I no longer hide my feelings. We are learning how to be mother and son again, this time as equals rather than dependent and caretaker. I have released the fantasy of a perfect family. Instead, I have embraced honesty. I understand now that love does not require self-erasure. It requires mutual recognition. Letting go of unrealistic expectations has given me emotional freedom I never knew I needed. On a personal level, I have rediscovered parts of myself long neglected. I attend watercolor classes, walk along the shoreline at sunrise, and write in my journal each evening. I have even developed a gentle friendship with a fellow widower I met at a community event. We share conversations and laughter without urgency or obligation. Sometimes, I reflect on the woman I was 2 years ago, sitting alone in a quiet house, afraid to speak. I feel compassion for her. She did the best she could with what she knew. Today, I am stronger, clearer, and kinder to myself. As the sun sets over the ocean, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and rose, I feel something I once believed was gone forever: peace. On quiet mornings in Charleston, I often sit by the window with a cup of tea and watch the sunlight stretch slowly across the ocean. In those moments, I think about the woman I used to be. She believed that being a good mother meant giving endlessly, remaining silent, and accepting pain without complaint. She thought love was measured by sacrifice alone. For many years, I lived according to those beliefs, never questioning whether they were fair to me. Looking back, I understand where those ideas came from. I was raised to believe that women held families together by enduring quietly. I was taught that conflict was dangerous and that speaking up could destroy relationships. So I learned to shrink my needs and soften my voice. I convinced myself that patience was the same as strength. It took losing my sense of self to realize how wrong I had been. Today, I see love differently. Love without respect is fragile. Love without boundaries becomes exhaustion. True care allows space for honesty, disagreement, and growth. It does not require anyone to disappear in order for others to feel comfortable. Learning this changed everything. It taught me that honoring myself was not selfish. It was necessary. If there is one message I want to share with other women, especially mothers who feel invisible, it is this: you are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to have opinions, dreams, and limits. Your worth does not decrease with age. Your voice does not lose value because others choose not to listen. Courage often begins with a single honest sentence spoken to yourself. I do not carry bitterness toward my son or his family. Holding on to resentment would only keep me tied to the pain of the past. Instead, I chose forgiveness with awareness. I forgave without forgetting. I healed without pretending nothing happened. That balance gave me peace. Life is still imperfect. Some days are lonely. Some memories still ache. But I no longer chase an ideal version of family that never truly existed. I accept people as they are, and I accept myself the same way. I am grateful for every difficult lesson, every tear, every moment of doubt that led me here. They taught me resilience. They taught me clarity. Most importantly, they taught me that I deserve to live fully and honestly. As the sun sets over the water each evening, I remind myself of one simple truth: I am enough. I do not apologize for being present, passionate, or real. This is my life, and I choose to honor it. Life has a quiet way of teaching us what truly matters. Sometimes it takes loss, disappointment, or loneliness to remind us of our own strength. Through every challenge, every moment of doubt, and every difficult choice, we learn that self-respect is not something we receive from others. It is something we choose for ourselves. Growth often begins when we stop shrinking to fit expectations and start honoring who we really are. Peace does not come from pleasing everyone. It comes from living honestly, setting healthy boundaries, and embracing our worth without apology. When we learn to listen to our own hearts, we discover that even the hardest seasons can lead to unexpected clarity and freedom. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it touched you in any way, please share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and follow the channel for more meaningful stories. Your support helps this community grow,